My name's Angie Lucas. I'm a senior land steward at the Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy. Today I'm at Arcadia Dunes in a coniferous wetland where we are looking at a rare and uncommon orchid species called Showy lady slipper. This species is a rare species for the Conservancy. We monitor it every year, and we are here today to talk more about why we are protecting the species and the efforts that it takes to protect this species. At the Conservancy, we do complete floristic quality inventories at each of our sites, and each plant in Michigan gets a C value or conservatism score for a habitat that it's specific to. The Showy lady slippers that we have here are a 9 out of 10, so they're pretty specific to a certain set of environmental criteria that they need in order to thrive. So these species are not seen just anywhere, and they require a bit of sun, a bit of calcium in the soil, and obviously a lot of water. And this species is also a preferred snack and food item for white-tailed deer. And we are inside of a Showy lady slipper exclosure area. What that means is that it is protected from herbivory by white-tailed deer from this fence that we see here. During the summer months, orchids are a special treat for white-tailed deer. So we are doing this exclosure as a way to protect a known population from population decrease, and to also compare this site to a non-exclosed area. This fence was installed as part of a partnership between the Leelanau Conservancy and the Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy. It was installed in 2019 after we observed numerous Showy lady slippers being eaten or munched on by white-tailed deer. We're also partners with the North American Orchid Conservation Center, and they have been helpful for helping us to learn more about orchid biology. And then we're partnering with them to submit genetic samples, leaf tissue, root samples, and seed to a national database that'll help us be more effective in the future if we ever do replanting efforts. We did get a generous donation from a volunteer this year, in addition to the volunteer who donated the fence. The volunteer is an orchid aficionado and donated the orchids to us, and we planted the seedlings this year, so we're monitoring those as well. And Showy lady slippers are one of the plants that takes a long time to go from seed to flower. So it takes at least 8 years for the species to bloom. And as you can imagine, if that flower is constantly eaten, then it stunts the plant and eventually it fades away from the ecosystem. So we're hoping by bringing in a few new seedlings, we can help benefit the species that are already here. And we have 2 clumps of the Showy lady slippers right here that you can see that are in full bloom. They're a midsummer, early summer blooming species, and they're getting towards the tail end of their peak bloom, but they're still really beautiful right now. Showy lady slipper is a special plant, and we're going to these extreme measures because it is so rare in our service area and in Michigan. And throughout its range in the eastern United States, it's listed as critical or imperiled at some level. So it's not a common plant. It has a very specific set of ecological requirements that it needs in order to thrive. It is at risk from poaching, from humans wanting to transplant it to their gardens, so we are cautious about sharing the location. But we do want to bring it to people's attention that this is a special plant of Michigan that sometimes requires a little extra effort. And one of the big threats to orchids in general is invasive plants, and obviously habitat loss and wetland draining and wetland loss, especially for our wetland orchids. A lot of invasive plants are not palatable to white-tailed deer, so that gives them an advantage in these ecosystems. And therefore, we have a crew every year that comes out and removes the invasive species plant, invasive species that might be threatening these high quality habitats. And another tool that we use beyond just hand removal or using shovels and weed wrenches is to use goats as a way to eat invasive shrubs and to knock back those large populations of really aggressive introduced non-native shrubs that can present a problem out of these areas. Some sites are so degraded and infested that goats are a great solution to those problems because we can fence them in within those areas, which decreases the likelihood of those invasive species spreading out from that epicenter of the really concentrated dense spots. In a spot like this where there's not as many invasives, we wouldn't bring goats in, obviously, because they would consume the native vegetation as well. So we would use the more specific hand removal techniques. Hi, here we are with the Showy lady slippers, and I just wanted to show you some interesting features of this beautiful plant. It's a bee pollinated species, and right now you can see the flower pouch, which gives it its lady slipper name. That name is Cypripedium reginae, and that also means queen-like, regal. So it's the other common name for this plant is the queen's lady slipper. Orchids are monocots, and therefore they have one seed leaf when they germinate. And monocots have parallel leaf veins, which you can see really clearly right here, that they are not, dissected or, cobwebby or netted. They're just really parallel leaf veins. So that indicates you have a monocot. And some folks say that these leaves have a tendency to give some folks rashes like poison ivy, but I've never experienced that, but it is good to be cautious. The other interesting thing about showy lady slippers and orchids in general is if they're pollinated, which requires the right pollinator relationship, obviously, the amount of seeds that they produce is just amazing. It's over 20,000 seeds, sometimes millions of seeds per flower. And obviously it takes a lot for that species to germinate, so they produce a lot of seed. So it's almost like a mushroom spore. It's that light, almost invisible. And we will be back in the later months to see how many pods have formed on these species. If there's no pod formation, we know that there's some critical pollinator link missing. So the Leelanau Conservancy has done efforts to cross-pollinate orchids, and we may need to do that in the future if we find that if there's something off kilter with the pollinators here. So it's definitely a species that we want to protect. It's really a lot of, figuring out the right tools for the right habitat, knowing your priorities for what you want to protect and how, and then the role of volunteers, partnerships, and supporters, and just the way everything ties in together is really important for a project like this. And we really are grateful for all of the efforts that went into this project. Thank you.